What I've got here is a really big box. This is the Belva Audio Systems BSAP212. This is a powered subwoofer enclosure with a pair of 12s. Well, first of all, it's packaged really well. There's some damage, kind of a bummer. I hope the enclosure itself isn't damaged. But it is double boxed, which is nice. I've done several reviews of prefab subwoofer enclosures, and oftentimes they only come in a single box. They're wooden boxes. How much packing material do you actually need? So this one right here though, because it's kind of odd shaped, I think it needs a little more packing material. Let's spin it around here. All right, there's the money shot. So I'm really happy with the packaging. It had lots of foam on the corners and across the top to protect it in shipping. I've gotten a lot of enclosures that didn't even have that, so I'm glad they went through the extra trouble to spend a little extra money on the packaging. I got a little piece of plastic over it to protect it from any moisture during shipping. I think that's important as well. And what we've got are a pair of 12s. There are some minor fit and finish issues here. Keep your eyes peeled for this small box right here. That box has the owner's manual, the plugs for the speaker level inputs, the 3.5 millimeter cable for the remote bass knob, and the remote bass knob. Now that knob is made out of metal, not plastic, so good job Sonic Electronics and Belva for not cheaping out and giving us a metal bass knob. Now for those who don't know, Sonic Electronics has a couple of different house brands, and Belva is one of their house brands. This is their entry-level budget house brand. You've probably heard of their higher-end house brand, NVX. They've also got a fitness brand called Victor Fitness. The guys out at Sonic Electronics sent me this subwoofer to review, so I'm going to give you the full breakdown. I'm going to take it apart. I'm going to do some measuring. The cool thing about getting a product from a company is I don't feel bad taking it apart since I didn't spend any money on it. And if you wanted to buy one of these things, well, you wouldn't ever take it apart because you're going to hook it up and use it. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about this subwoofer enclosure so you can kind of understand what it is and what it's all about. One of the things you've got to keep in mind is this is an entry-level product. This enclosure, which includes an amplifier, 2 subwoofers, and of course the enclosure itself, is only 250 bucks. And right now, if you're watching this in the tail end of 2021, there's a Black Friday sale, so you can get 15% off of this thing. So for under 250 bucks, you can get some bass in your ride. And you would be hard pressed to find the parts to put together to replicate this. You can go on Sonic Electronics website and find the exact same subwoofers that are in the enclosure, an inexpensive amplifier that's the same brand as the enclosure, and just a generic subwoofer enclosure, and it would actually be more expensive. And so this is kind of handy because it's all in one package. One of the main advantages of a system like this with the built-in amplifier is that you don't need to find a place to mount the amplifier. So it makes the installation just a little bit easier. But there are a couple other things you need to be aware of before you go and buy this. And it's the kind of thing that an entry-level car audio consumer might not think about. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean 2 things. You're going to need signal and you're going to need power. If you don't have signal and power, you won't be able to hook this thing up. So make sure that when you're ordering the product, you go ahead and get yourself an amplifier wiring kit. Now this only accepts 8-gauge wire. I recommend that you go ahead and spend the extra money to get an 8-gauge copper wire. I have a wire calculator that I use to figure out what size wire that I need, and it looks like you're really going to have to go with copper wire in this case. You can download this calculator. I'll show you how to get to that a little bit later. The manufacturer says that this is a 360 watt RMS amplifier. We're going to take it apart a little bit and look at the internals of the amplifier and see if we can figure out what its power rating actually is. So make sure you keep watching so you can see that. Hey, why don't we go ahead and pull it apart right now and see what's going on behind this amplifier plate. All right, so I'm not an amp guru, so I'm not 100% certain what I'm looking at here. There is a fuse right here, and so if you were to blow the fuse, a few screws, and you can have that fuse out. This is a 40 amp fuse. You know the old rule of thumb, multiply by 10. If it's got a 40 amp fuse, multiply that by 10, we should expect 400 watts. This thing says max 840, 340 RMS, and so I think that their power rating is a fairly decent power rating as far as the accuracy goes. So I'm happy to see that it has a 40 amp fuse inside of it. The MOSFETs, the chips that actually do the amplifying, are up here, and so this nice big piece of aluminum is going to be our heatsink. I'm looking for anything on the board that will kind of give me an idea what it is, so I can try to Google RTP series amp revision 1.2. So when I Googled RTP series amp, what I got was, the first hit was actually Sonic Electronics webpage, and it was this right here. It's an MTX Road Thunder series. This was a 2-channel amp. So I wonder if it's using the same board as the Road Thunder amps from MTX. If you know more about these amplifiers, you can tell me about it down in the comments. I'd love to learn more about this amp and what it is and where it came from. How about if we grab some test gear and check out the subwoofers? And since we have access to the speaker leads, we can do all kind of cool testing with it. Grab our multimeter, set it to ohms for measuring the resistance, and we see that the nominal resistance is 2.2, so this is wired in parallel to 2 ohms, so they're a pair of 4 ohm drivers. Let's go ahead and hook it up to the DATs next and do an impedance sweep and see what we get. Looks like we're getting something really close to 20 hertz, which is a pretty low tuning frequency. It's not what I would have expected. Maybe I've hooked something up wrong. I did take the subwoofers out before I did this. Maybe I didn't get them screwed down properly when I put them back in. So I'm not sure what to make of that. Let's take the woofers back off and take a good look inside the enclosure and see if we can figure out what's going on. These screws have these little bushings on them. That's cool. I like that. First thing I want to point out, speaker wire, decent sized gauge speaker wire for the power. They took the time to wrap it in tessitate, so that's good news. They did solder on the connections. I like that. It's a good solid connection. It looks like when they installed the screws in originally that they did have a little bit of a blowout here. They do put some sheets of polyfill in here. And there's the port here. All right, got the second woofer off. We can see that they are paralleled and soldered together. That's cool. Again, there's the test tape on the wire. This wire also has test tape on it as well, so that's good. There is a brace. The amplifier itself is going to be sitting in its own separate chamber. There's the hole where the wire came through for the amplifier. You can see right here behind the port, the seam where they did that nice round over on the exterior. You can see they did a good job of sealing that as well, so they did a fantastic job. You can see the caulk right here, but they went through the extra trouble to caulk it up properly on the inside. So overall, I think they did a perfectly good job of constructing the enclosure. Even though it is an inexpensive enclosure, they did go through the trouble to put some bracing inside of it and build it right. The port, of course, is a cardboard tube, and that is perfectly fine for a low power application like this. They did go through the trouble to support the port. You can see here a port support. That port support actually wraps around the back side of the port and holds it in place here as well. So that's good. It's like a triangle that fits in there. As far as the port itself, let's see if we can get an idea how long that port is. So the port was about 21 inches in total length and looked to be about 3 inches in diameter. And of course it has those flares on the end. Now a little bit ago I showed my DATS result and said that, hey, this thing's kind of tuned lower than I expected. It was tuned around 20 hertz. And so I'm thinking that it might actually be tuned that low because it does have a pretty large port for the diameter. We can just go to the website for precision ports and they have a calculator that'll tell you roughly what your tuning is when you have a flared port. So let's check that out. So I don't really know what the volume of the box is. I can't find specifications for that. It being a pair of 12s, it could be anywhere from around 2 cubic feet or more. So let's say that we've got 2.5 cubic feet just to have something to work with. Let's say it is tuned to 21 hertz. And let's say we do have a 3-inch port. We hit the calculate button and we're getting a flare length of 17.85 inches to get a tuning frequency of 20 hertz. That's the total length of the port and the flare is what this is. So if this is a 2 cubic foot box, or to be a bit on the small side, we get a 22-inch long port, flares included. So it's probably perfectly reasonable to think that this thing might actually be tuned that low. I'm a little bit surprised by that, actually. I was afraid I was gonna crack this thing open and have a tiny little 6-inch long port, and I was gonna have to tell you that it's tuned to some crazy 40 hertz number and is therefore not really useful for bass. But it seems to be tuned actually quite low, maybe even a little bit too low. I would have tuned it a bit higher if it were me. The woofers themselves are, of course, inexpensive drivers. Don't know how well you can see in there, but inside here, there's the spider. You can see the voice coil as well. Got a vented pole piece, got some venting here. Simple stamp steel basket, inexpensive. For a low power application like that, you don't need a very extensive basket. It appears to be a polycone with a rubber surround, and that's good, lightweight and solid. You know, again, it's not some huge giant super woofer with a giant magnet, but you're not paying what you would pay for a giant super woofer with a giant magnet. Overall, just fine for the price point, about what you should expect at the price point. So let's get this thing put back together and get it loaded up in the truck so I can give it a test bump. One thing you want to consider when you're hooking up something like this is you want to think about how you're going to get signal to the unit. It has RCA inputs and it has speaker level inputs. So if you're putting this in a trunk or something and you can tap into the back speakers, you don't need to upgrade your head unit. You can just plug it into your factory system. But you got to be careful with that because some factory systems are going to have things like active noise cancellation, or the factory system might have some bass roll off. This is where the bass gets quieter as you turn up the volume. The easy solution for the active noise cancellation is to find the active noise cancellation microphones and just unplug them. If your car has the bass roll off, the best solution for that is to get a device that will restore that bass. What you're looking for is an audio control epicenter or an audio control line output converter that has the epicenter technology. There might be other brands that do similar things. You can find everything you need on the Sonic Electronics website. Let's go ahead and get this thing hooked up and see what it sounds like. Now, I'll be perfectly honest with you. I was prepared to be entirely unimpressed with this because it is an entry-level system. So I wasn't expecting it to be too terribly loud, and I wasn't expecting a real high-end sound quality. It actually sounds a lot better than I thought it was gonna sound. When I first hooked it up, I thought it sounded absolutely terrible, and then I started tuning it a little bit. What I found worked really well was to turn the gain all the way down and turn down the subwoofer output on my head unit and just go right ahead and control the bass with the bass knob. And when I did that, I got some really good results. As far as the really low stuff goes, it really couldn't handle the ultra low stuff. The Techmaster PEB, the opening track from it came from outer bass. It couldn't keep up with that, but as you can hear with the YouTube approved copyright free music, it did just fine. So if you don't have a lot of money, this is a perfectly acceptable starter set. There's no reason not to pick this one up if you've only got 250 bucks to spend on your subwoofer. Now, like I said earlier, make sure you leave room in the budget for your wire. It definitely gets loud enough to hurt your ears, and you can fine tune the sound with that bass knob as you're driving. The main thing is you have to have realistic expectations. This isn't going to keep up with a pair of 500 watt subwoofers. It's not going to keep up with high-end sound quality stuff, but it is perfectly adequate for a daily driver. Make sure, of course, if you're using proper wiring, you want to check out this video right here where I show you my wire calculator. And I want to say thank you to all of my patrons. These guys right here helped me out with a donation to the channel, with a special thanks to $25 patron Dylan. And once again, thanks to the guys at Sonic Electronics for sending this out to me. I'm the DIY Audio Guy. I'll see you on the next adventure.